Hey guys, welcome back to the Paladins Alliance. Thank you for all the support on the Roster Mania video with the report cards. It's a type of content that I don't usually make, and you guys really seem to enjoy it. The last one as well did really well, and for that reason, I want to keep the ball rolling in the roster side of things and see where we can go from here, and whether or not we can find a new identity for the channel or whatnot. But this is a tweet shown from TravCS, publicly listed on HLTV, with all the benched and free agents that are currently in our competitive Counter-Strike scene. And there are a lot of options. There are a lot of options in a lot of different regions that we can cover. But I want to primarily make a video today about the best free agents or bench players to build an entire team around pre-2022. So this is the actual players that I'm going to be talking about are very integral to that team's identity, right? It's not necessarily just like a plug and play player, like a supportive element, or just a like star rifler. There has to be some other element to his game that is the reason why I'm adding him on this list. So there are going to be a couple of important things that I want to note here before we start moving on and just get a little bit of a glimpse as to what I'm thinking when I picked all of these players out. So the first type of player that I can pick to build a team around is obviously an IGL, because that is the identity and core of the team, right? If I pick Boomich, I understand that I'm not really getting a very tactical IGL per se, but I am getting a player that is much more willing to sacrifice his life and set players up around him and really believe in the set of 4 players that surround him. But at the same time, if I'm picking a player like Glaive, I already understand that if I'm in the Prime Astralis era, that we're going to have a much more tactical style of things, and there's going to be a lot more structure with how all these players are playing. So that's what I want to think about when I'm building a team around an IGL, right? The other easiest piece is obviously an AWP player. If you have a very aggressive AWP player like somebody like Art, well, that's when you know that the AWP in that situation is a lot more more aggressive, and in the sense it's more risk reward heavy, as opposed to maybe a player like Device, where he's going to go for the angles that don't necessarily need much risk involved, but he still gets the kills needed, right? And when you build a squad around that, you have to also have pieces that set up those players in those certain ways. So AWP players really can create the identity of a team, and that's also another important role that I had to include when I was picking these players that I want to build a team around. And then longevity at tier 1. A lot of these players are very talented, no doubt. There are players like Lollipop 21K, very, very skilled player. But objectively, these players also don't have many tier 1 accolades. They don't have many lands under their belt. And for that reason, in this day and age, with the number of organizations that aren't coming into CS, we would want somebody that has already proven on the land stage that we can kind of leave to their own devices. We don't really have to hold their hand and develop those players as they emerge into tier 1, right? So they need to be able to compete at the highest level while also becoming that primary identity of the team. So a great example for that is, think about Nico, right? He's just an absolutely incredibly talented player, one of the highest skill caps in the game, but he's also very land tenured. He's done it on land for years on end, and for that reason he is one of the best in the game, because he is very skilled at the game, but he's also land tenured while doing it, right? So that's another big key proponent as to when I was picking out these players. They're all pretty much at tier 1 or just on the cusp, right? There's a little bit more land experience and they're there. And finally, intangibles. This is something that I covered in the roster report cards as well. But can this player play internationally, right? Sometimes your options might be limited and you can't actually play with certain regions, right? But there are a lot of CIS players that can't necessarily play internationally because they don't know English. So these little intangibles can also be important when we're picking out players. But let's jump into my first player. I'm really excited to talk about him because I'm sure a lot of you guys have been talking about him as well. So of Extremum fame, of Tai Lu and Gen G fame, I have to pick Ben Tet as my first player. He's honestly Asia's greatest superstar and still has a lot more to prove in international Counter-Strike. And you can see here, this is on a dying team of Extremum. These were the ratings that he produced on his time during COVID and whatnot. This is the entire ratings that he had, and they're honestly pretty good for the caliber of team that Extremum was and where they were at in the competitive scene. So that's good to note. And the regions available to him are also great to see that he can branch out like that. He can go back to Asia if he wants to, but again, he sounded like he wanted to continue to play internationally with English-speaking rosters. So Europe and North America are also on the table, especially after he played through with Gen G. And so a couple of points to note about Bentet and why I believe that he can be a identity of a team and a player that you can build around. He's a star in every sense of the word, right? He's carried his Tai Lu squad to like multiple main stage major appearances, and before this, Tai Lu was a very hit or miss team. They had very high skill ceilings in their squads, and they were able to get key scalps off of great teams like Luminosity, famously, but they weren't able to actually be a definitive team and have a definitive identity, and that's when Bentet stepped in as an IGL, called in 3 different languages, and also was the star of the team. So objectively, Bentet has always been a very underrated and very skilled player, but also has a very, very good brain on his shoulders, right? And beyond that, right, he was also the safe pair of hands that Gen G needed when you had volatile players like Psalm on your team that, while their skill ceiling could be like potentially higher than a player like Bentet, they weren't necessarily hitting that cap, the cap of firepower that Gen G needed, and Bentet was always that safe pair of hands that would provide you that extra step. And again, as I said before, on Extremum, the team was sorely lacking in firepower, with Gratisfaction not being able to get the key amount of AWP kills, and that's where a player like Bentet was able to step in and provide a little bit of firepower into these squads, and whatever meager results they did get were basically on the back of him and a little bit of Azur's heroics as well. And as I was saying before with Tai Lu, he has a potential IGL in any capacity. He can either primary call like how he did in Tai Lu, and you can make him an IGL, and he'd love to do that. He's been able to do that very well. And he was also the secondary caller for Daps' Gen G, and that worked out very well, right? He had some success on LAN, and when they actually went to their first DreamHack Open, that's where they performed the best, because they just had a lot of very good synergy, and that's where Bentet really shines. So LAN-wise, I feel like Bentet has all the checks passed in that regard, and he can definitely just show up to a new organization and start hitting the ground running whenever he does show up on LAN, because he's already fought through the trials and tribulations on Tai Lu. But I'm going to have a little tab here for every player with worries, and I can't say that every single player on the bench list is just flying colors the best to pick out, and so I have to always notate what is the little caveat that I have for each of these free agents. So for Bentet, he never actually consistently found his highs that he had on Tai Lu. So at Tai Lu, he found this insane gear where he was just banging heads and out stratting all of these opponents that he wasn't able to really find on Gen G and Extremum, and perhaps you could chalk it up to time, but he does need experience at that peak level of CSGO that he wasn't able to find, and a lot of it has to come down to COVID, because when Gen G was actually on the up and up, they had to get taken down into online, and then Extremum never even got to play a single LAN in their tenure. So if he can start getting the ball rolling on an organization that can immediately start playing LANs, that's where Bentet, I think, is a no-brainer. You have to pick him up, and going forward, again, I've loved everything that Bentet's put on the table. He's a very hardworking individual, and he has the skills to back it up. My second of 5 players is none other than MSL, one of the greatest IGLs Denmark has ever produced, and this all is predicated on the fact that he can create systems out of nothing, out of players that you have never heard of, and make them superstars in their own right. So again, regions to consider. He isn't like Bentet in the fact that he can speak 3 languages. He can kind of speak 2, Danish and English. And for that reason, you can either keep him domestically in the Danish scene and build a Danish team around him, because, my God, they have so much talent right now. Or you can pivot to North America, and that is also something that he's been said to be open about. So let's talk about why exactly MSL is as great as he is, and why do people laud him so much, and why has, like, even after South's calamities, why is he still being considered as one of the greatest IGLs? Well, he's unlocked countless Danish talent, right? He's done incredible things like I don't think you would have known who Config was, or Magisk, or Kirby. These players that you probably wouldn't have known of if it wasn't for MSL. He's done incredible things on Dignitas, and then North on in the early moments of the team, and he took them to unbelievable heights and unlocked these talents. And now you have Config fragging out on Astralis, formerly on Complexity, doing well on Optic as well. And you had players like Magisk, who obviously was part of the greatest lineup ever assembled on Astralis. And then you had Kiarbi, who's also a major winner, who was on Astralis, who did well. I mean, obviously not to the same extent as somebody like Magisk on North, but he still was a very, very important piece of talent in the Danish scene and in the international scene. And this was all thanks to MSL. There are tons of, and with that, there are tons of unrefined talents that could similarly be unlocked if he's given the resources. So think about anybody on Copenhagen Flames that you could pick up. Honestly, you could literally even take out Hooksy and put in MSL, because the amount of talent that these guys have is insane. You have Nico Odo, Siphon, Yabi. These guys are all very, very talented players. And MSL can create that system that you need to elevate those talents to unbelievable levels, right? And beyond Copenhagen Flames, there's so many other pieces of Danish talent that you can reach into, that this guy knows how to scout and find, that if you give him enough resources and enough money, he can do it absolutely. And again, as I was saying with the systems, he can elevate any loose squad. You can even plug and play him into a team like Liquid, right? Who objectively have a very loose set of play. And obviously Nitro is going to come through. But let's say, for example, that I put in MSL into that team. Well, now perhaps you could shine a light on players like Elige and players like Shox, who thrive in a system where there are set roles. And that's where they can become even bigger stars than they are right now, because as of right now, the loose style of Counter-Strike isn't something that is going to work for every squad, and perhaps we have to turn to a player like MSL to create that system, and to create an ecosystem where players like the stars of Elige and Shox can thrive. And yeah, again, the other teams that, for example, NIP, Mouse, any really tier 2 NA team, Europe team could all thrive under MSL. And you want, and I think there was the interview that Gade had where he talked about playing under MSL, and when MSL left the team, they realized that they didn't even understand that they had a system once he was gone, because that's how integral he is for this team. So identity-wise, he is pristine in every sense of the word. Again, I have to talk about the worries. There are worries for every player, and for MSL, it's that if the results don't follow this stringent structure, mutiny can happen. And that kind of happened in North, and they kicked him, and then they brought him back when they realized their folly. But it was kind of too little too late, and that's when players don't really start to believe in the structure, because a lot of it is just predicated on like believing in the calls of your IGL through and through. And if that doesn't work, then that's where you might have a problem with your team chemistry, and it has tended to happen with MSL. But he has learned a lot about the game and the meta, and he's evolved and adapted his system accordingly, and perhaps with a little bit more ability to loosen up, it could be the key stylistic change that an MSL-led team needs. And then the other thing is also individual level must be brought into question to get today's game. When you look at the IGLs across the board, they've all elevated their game like a crazy amount. Obviously, you have Nafany on Gambit. He's a great fragger. You have Apex also fragging. You have Boomich fragging. You have, Cadian in high-pressure situations might not frag as well, but he does frag consistently in group stages and early playoff matches as well. So everywhere you look, these IGLs have a safe pair of hands as far as the amount of fragging that they're outputting. And if MSL can't rise up to that occasion and play like how he did at that DreamHack Masters way back when, then we might have to bring that into question later on in the longevity of this roster. But overall, MSL is one of the talents to pick up if you have to build a team around him. Undoubtedly, probably the biggest talent on my list thus far. I know I talked about IGLs, and I know I talked about how AWP players are essential to any team, and I haven't talked about an AWP player later, and I will jump into that in a little bit. But I want to switch gears to the CIS region, because, man, these guys have so much talent. There are so many people that you can turn to provide an incredible amount of fragging, but the player that I want to talk about is Mir from Team Spirit formerly, and he's been an absolutely of a revelation of a rifler across his time on Spirit, time on Vega Squadron as well. He's absolutely integral to the identity of a multiple rosters throughout his career. And if he is put on another team and they use him in the right ways, I think that he can be be the forefront of the primary identity of a team going into 2022. So looking at the ratings of Spear's best run of events, that's Mir's ratings, and they look stunning, right? I mean, this is when you brought in Dexter, and I don't know if I think Magic was still on the team. I'm not sure, but this is when the team was at their best. This is their best string of runs, and it's all predicated on magic created from Mir and his trusty AK-47. And although his regions available are only CIS, it's still something that maybe he can work on English throughout this break and try to develop it in a sense, because later on, I think there are so many opportunities where he can open up teams and make them much, much better if he does know English, that I did put a question mark there that it's just CIS for right now. And as I was saying earlier, he's been part of so many different lineups, CIS lineups. He put Vega Squadron on the map way back when in the E-League major, and then subsequent majors there as well, where they revolutionized a lot of biting T-sides. And he put himself on the map alongside Chopper. And then he did lose his footing on Gambit. Granted, I don't think they used him in the right ways. And for that reason, his career took a massive dip and his stock really dropped. And it felt as though that Mir would drop out of relativity because of how much talent there is in the CIS scene. But that's when he came back on his Spirit and he really turned his career around and brought up a new batch of young talents and then reinvigorated his own career while doing so. And for that reason, I can easily say that he's LAN tenured. He's been through the highs and lows of what LAN has to offer, and he's still on the highs of it right now. And he has a very good grasp of what is expected on LAN, and he can bring up any sort of young talent that is in spades in the CIS scene, right? So this is a player that I would really, really want on a team and to build around, because I know that he has a safe pair of hands in the fragging department, but also in the experience department. He's a danger of CIS personified. When you think of a CIS player and why they are so talented, is they have these threateningly quick T-sides that he revolutionized on Vega Squadron. I think the famous thing that you can remember is where they would buy all 5 MAC-10s and just run up Banana with an incredible execute on Banana and just stun through the B site because of how good players like Mir are with their first couple of bullets. And then you switch over to the CT side of things. They have rock solid anchoring, and it's all personified, in my opinion, by Mir. And the fact that he has this such a well-rounded CIS understanding of Counter-Strike, you can apply this to any sort of player in the Russian side of things and create a roster out of nothing with this player. He has a great understanding of finding openings throughout the map with the lowest risk involved. So, again, when I tie it back to Inferno, he has a very great understanding of the B side of the map. Again, once he revolutionized the biting T sides with the MAC-10s, he's still able to finagle his way around CT utility and still find openings for his team. And that requires a different skill set that not many CIS players have. It's a lot more, let's focus on your crosshair. And when you look to players like Bit, that's what their primary job is. But when it's Mir, you have different complexions to the player, and you can really pick and choose where you want to put him, because he can definitely play those roles to a high level. Again, worries, I have to bring them up, but he's been known to say that he's a package deal with Chopper, and personally, I think Chopper's IGLing has run its course. Towards the end of Spirit, they really lost their identity because of how Chopper was calling, and it really deterred me from considering how good Chopper's calling is, especially when you have players like Dexter on your team that were just significantly brought down in levels. And then, as I talked about in the very beginning of this, lack of English could also be a big impact, because there could be so many international rosters that could really benefit from a player like Mir, but sadly that isn't the case, and we're going to have to see if he can better his English, because if that's the case, then who knows the trajectory that Mir can end up here in 2022. We'll switch to the regions again, and now we'll finally talk about the AWP player that I've selected here, and that's Henny. And I know you guys are probably going to get very mad about this. just because internationally, or sorry, not even internationally, in his own region, in 0-0 Nation, he wasn't able to do anything. And I don't think that's per se his fault. I think it's a lot to do with the identity of the team and the lack of it. And when we have to face the facts, he's been easily the best and easiest Brazil AWP to build a team around. And beyond Immortals and Furia, he hasn't had that breakthrough yet. And I think whatever team they want to create around him could be the key time for him to really make a name for himself once more. Again, regions available Brazil. I'm not sure how good his English is, so I just for the sake of simplicity, I didn't put North America or Europe or whatnot. And I think he'd like to stay within his region just to make things easier with Portuguese and whatnot. Incredible skill ceiling. There's nothing to doubt about that. Not only did he smash his way to a major final with Immortals way back when in Krakow, but he took Furia to insane heights. And honestly, if they maybe pushed and pulled a specific rifler on their team when they were in their heydays in Furia, who knows what we could have been in the Furia story. Perhaps we wouldn't be bopping around with random fifths now, and we would have had a stable Furia. But no matter, right? There is land proven results from Henny, and he's a veteran in his own right. He's proved time and time again that he can hang with the big boys and exceed them, right? And for that reason, I think Henny is one that you have to keep your eyes on, so that he passes the eye test for sure. But what else does he provide that many others don't? So again, what are your other AWP options? You have Safi. He's going to Furia right now, and he's probably the biggest rival in this conversation. But then you go to Try, and he's a bit too risky. Objectively, when he was playing against top levels of competition, he wasn't able to compete, and he wasn't able to really frag out. And he still has to find his footing in Tier 1 Counter-Strike. Not to mention that his buyout is probably incredibly high. I don't think 9Z want to let him go very cheaply, and for that reason, we don't really know what the situation is with him. And he's probably your second best option. And then you start grasping at straws. You want to get in Maluki? Well, he can't really compete against the top level competition either yet. Every time he has a Tier 1 opportunity, he isn't really able to deliver. So you have more experience on Henny. You have a consistently high skill ceiling on Henny. And for these reasons, you can easily build a team around him, and you can easily get the intangibles of how confident he is and how much of a glue piece he is, that the sky's the limit with Henny if you do play your cards right and you have a very tempered IGL alongside him. I think a great call for that would be somebody like Steel, who he's played with before. They definitely understand each other, and I think that could be a very good pairing for Brazil going into 2022. And you could have another big team like Godsend just jump out at you. But of course, worries for Henny, they're probably a little bit more than the other players, but they have to be discussed, right? After 0-0 Nation, we have to consider motivational and mentality issues. He did leave Furia to just play with Lucas, and it kind of blew up Furia as we know it, and it didn't really amount to anything in his career with 0-0 Nation, and it didn't amount to anything in Furia as well. The Furia project also fell through, right? And objectively, we have to talk about that intangible, because it can't fragment a Brazilian team, especially with how high the emotions can be when these teams get into tough situations. So, I mean, worst case scenario, you can pair him with Lucas, but I think he is a much better player than Lucas and has a much better future in his career compared to Lucas, that I think that he should move away from playing with him and try to focus on playing with IGLs like Steel and bringing up more younger talent and furthering his career that way. But although risky is a pick of Henny, sorry, I completely botched my words there. Although Henny is an incredibly risky pick, I still think he is an outstanding option if you play your cards right in the Brazilian scene to make yet another great team in that region. And for my last little pairing, I'm going to take it back to Europe, and I'm breaking the quote-unquote rule of players, and I'm making a duo out of them. But I sincerely think that this is the best duo that you can create out of the free agents available right now. An absolutely terrifying international duo, and I think they were continuously wronged in their time on FPX just because of their fifth player situation, the IGL mishandling, and for that reason, I think their stock is definitely lowered, but they're very malleable and they're very menacing in many ways, and I want to get into it as I talk about these points to consider real quick. Again, regions available, international options. I don't think they'd play on an NA team, but that option is always available. But internationally, they're probably going to have to create like a phase, mouse, what have you type lineup and go from there. So objectively, I think they were the best parts of FPX. I think Farlig was a little bit overrated, although he did very well on his previous teams. He wasn't able to rise up to that same caliber on FPX. I think all of the IGLs that were rolled around in that lineup weren't very good. And I think Zen has potential to be a great player, but I think he's also kind of run his course, especially with his age. I mean, you're obviously never getting younger in this world, and I think Zen has to be put into that category of perhaps it's a little bit risky to bring him alongside these two. But Stico has been a very solid star on a dying FPX, and even when they were in their heyday, he was putting up star level ratings that I wasn't expecting from him, especially after his time on Mouse. That in and of itself is a great piece of firepower that you can have if you want to put him in star positions. And that alongside Madden, who is also a safe pair of hands in the fragging department, it makes it much more frightening and much more dangerous, especially moving into 2022. If they have a stable IGL, these two can be put in any sort of position and succeed. And more than Madden, I think Madden is a very skilled player. I think he is very adaptable in that sense. He can play under a lot of different IGLs and he's fragged well. But the adaptability of Stico in specific, he was definitely one of the best supportive elements Mouse has ever had, and he's the reason why players like Oscar were as good as they were, because he was able to set up so many players, and for that reason, it could be that perfect alley-oop that Madden needs on a new team. Let's say we want to move away Stico from a star role on any team, and bring in more younger talent. He's that perfect player that is able to get information without dying, stay alive in a lot of situations, provide a lot of nifty utility for AWP players and star riflers, or he can just take the fight and outright win them. So Stico is a very key proponent in this duo, and the reason why Madden could be as good as he can be because of Stico, right? But with the worries, I have a little less worries than somebody like Henny, obviously, but they have to be part of an international lineup, right? There's no common language that these guys speak, which means much longer time is needed to gel these cultures together, right? And a team from scratch, especially internationally, is very difficult to create. Obviously, you can see C9. They took a long time to actually get the ball rolling, and they had a little bit unlucky things go their way, and they had to disband. So there is a lot to talk about with international teams, and we can go into that in another video, but it is a worry that we have to think about, because the skill cap can be very high, but how much of it is actually realized, then we don't actually know. But all in all, that is all the players that I selected in this free agent / benched video. I think that there are a lot of talent in the Counter-Strike space, and we could have made maybe 5 more, honestly. But these are the five or six players rather that I put in this list that I can clearly see make a way back to tier 1 if they're given the amount of resources and the organizations believe in the identity that these guys provide. I thoroughly enjoyed making this video. It's something that I've never made before, and I hope that you guys enjoyed watching this as much as I do. Subscribe if you did like it. I'm going to keep trying to see where this channel is going to go, whether we want to pivot to more roster talk or if we want to go to more of analytical side of things, or maybe a mix of both. But I've thoroughly enjoyed 2021, and I can't wait for 2022. We'll have one more video, I think, for this year, and then we'll head on in to the new year, and I will catch you guys there alongside the ride. So thank you guys for supporting, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.